Good morning, everybody, and welcome to OpenSky's webinar, Cracking the Competitiveness Code. My name is Jennifer Ward, and I'm Marketing Manager here at OpenSky. For those of you who don't know us, we're automation specialists that develop and customize IT solutions for medium to large private enterprises, as well as many large government agencies here in Ireland and the UK. So we developed this webinar because we can really relate to many of you here today. We, like you, have seen impacts to our business over the last few months and have been forced to make changes to secure the business into the future. We've had to manage new and unexpected cost burdens. We've had to rethink and restructure many of our business processes to accommodate many new changes, new working environments, etc. So all of these changes, they cost money, and it's money that we simply hadn't accounted for at the end of last year or the beginning of this year. So we need to really work a lot smarter and be more efficient and more productive without increasing operational costs. By doing that, we can continue to maintain profitability and competitiveness in the business. So the webinar really aims to highlight to you all how to do precisely that. How to maintain competitiveness in your business through the use of the right technology. And as many people here today will know from unfortunate previous experiences, making the wrong technology tool choice results in higher costs and lower success rates. The very thing that will not support your business operating competitively. So let's move on with the discussion and thrash the conversation out. We have a dynamic panel for you this morning who I'm sure are itching to get started. They've put a lot of time and effort into developing this, what I hope is a quality discussion, which I really hope you're going to enjoy and get a lot out of. So OpenSky are really thrilled to have the fantastic, dynamic and energetic, to say the least, Emmet Ryan as our moderator this morning. For those of you who don't know him, I think most people do, but Emmet is the editor of Connected magazine, and he's business and technology reporter with the Business Post, which is a publication that kind of sits under many of our noses really in business and technology world in Ireland. So I won't harp on. I'll hand over to Emmet now to introduce the panel and to get the discussion going. Over to you, Emmet.
Thanks very much, Jennifer, and welcome everyone this morning. Really looking forward to talking to you all right now, even from the comfort of my home office, which I'm sure we're all in our home offices right now, or sort of other places around where we live. It's a different type of, sort of event. But just to give you some context as to who I am, last night I was important enough for Twitter to suspend my account, but not important enough to be one of the people hacked by the Bitcoin people. So that's roughly where I fall in terms of my influence. I've got two great panelists joining me today. Niall Fitzmaurice, who is a very long title, but a very important title, I will say as well, Business Applications Business Group Lead at Microsoft, and Susan Hayes-Culleton, who has the rather noble title of being the Positive Economist, which we'll definitely get into at some point throughout this. But before I get to the panelists, I want to remind you all of the Q&A function, which is a really important thing, because my old American football coach back when I played, because when you're my size, you've got certain sports you're good at, and American football is definitely one of them. He said, the more you put into something, the more you get out. If ever there was a time in humanity that really rings through, it's right now. So while we've got lots of great things we're going to be talking about, going to be discussing between ourselves, this really is about all of you. We want you all to get involved, so get your questions in. And alongside that, as you can see there, we also have our polls running throughout. So we've got 3 polls we're going to be asking you. Keep them coming, and we'll revert back to them throughout this. I'll get the panelists to get their opinions on what you were all thinking. But like I said, the Q&A section, it's really, really important. We want to be answering the questions you want to ask. So be sure to get them in, and I'll be putting those to our 2 great panelists throughout this. But before I get to the panelists, I just want to talk really about the challenge ahead of us, because I've obviously been dealing with a lot myself with my job. You've been dealing with a lot. Susan's been dealing with a lot. Niall's been dealing with a lot. Everybody's been dealing with a lot. And when it comes to sort of leadership in any business, there's 2 things you need to be. One is honest, and the other is ambitious. If you're only one, you're not going to be okay. You need to be both, because if you're neither, you're absolutely good night, good luck. But if you're honest with your employees, they'll respect you. They'll understand this is what's happening and this is why it's happening. That's so important when it comes to communication right now, especially when you can't really be in person with them. But also be ambitious, because everybody remembers the start of this. There was the usual, what's going to happen? Will I be okay? These are the important questions. If you're honest with them, you can tell them why, there's a risk. But if you're ambitious, you can say, here's not how we're going to survive this. Here's how we're going to come through this stronger. I think that's something we're going to hear a lot from Niall and Susan this morning. And I'm, thinking we need to think about how business operates, because obviously there's spaces, how we use those, but not just that, how we communicate, how we sell essentially has to change right now. And this is a lot of big macro questions, which are quite hard for a business, no matter what the size is, from a one-person sole trader all the way up to your massive global multinationals. They're asking the same questions right now, and they're looking for the answer. So hopefully we're going to get some good ones here. And I'm going to start off though with Susan, because she's got a wonderful title as the Positive Economist, because we all knew it as a dismal science, but Susan's more upbeat, which is a great sign. And Susan, I suppose the microeconomic impact, because everyone's feeling it to some degree. Tell us a bit about that and the burdens and the costs, not just financial costs, that are likely to be faced by business at the moment.
Thank you very much, Emmet, for that lovely introduction, and indeed to OpenSky for having me here today. Yes, costs have changed. The nature of costs has changed. The amount of costs have changed, etc. But one of the ones that is very, very hard to quantify is the cost of reframing strategy. I mean, the massive global experiment around mass remote working took place very, very quickly, and it happened to a large degree when we didn't have an awful lot of choice about it. Now, when it comes to thinking about how do we actually adapt for, whether you want to call it the next normal, the new normal, I don't even know if there's a word before normal anymore, maybe it just is what's normal now, is you have to think about in terms of what's happening, what do I need to do with investment, with my people, and all of the things you mentioned, how we sell, how we communicate, etc. But some industries have been through a big trend of change in recent times, but COVID-19 and the related restrictions has simply accelerated that. For example, online delivery volume, it actually increased more in 8 weeks than it did in the decade before that. Like telemedicine, that the size of that industry increased tenfold in just 15 days. So how do you keep up with that? And how do you know that you're backing the right things? If we look at something, let's look at it on a smaller basis. Think about hairdressers and bars, even if I could mention them today. Like a couple of weeks ago, it was 2 meters, and unless there was a 2 meter of social distance, you simply couldn't operate. Whereas then just a few mere weeks later in the UK, it was down to 1 meter plus. So when you're trying to figure out what to do, when you're trying to figure out what to change, there's actually the cost of figuring out what you want to do, bringing your senior people in, evaluating things, being nimble and being agile, and also then of course not missing the boat. So that's certainly one area that I think matters, and I think what Niall is going to talk about later on today in terms of how we can help that with automation is going to be very, very helpful. The second thing is the risk. Who should bear the cost of the risks that we now face? Should it be the customer who pays more for PPE? I got my nails done at the weekend, for example, and there was an extra charge put on there for PPE. Very, very happy to pay it. But ultimately, who should take the burden of it? Should it be the consumer? Should it be the business? Should it be the government? Should it be us all? And like that is a tiny example. But when we think about the cost of innovation, what about when we're trying to take on really big projects with a view to investing in long-term strategic change? Who should fund it? And of course, it's not just about who funds it, who puts up the money, but also who takes the downside in that event. And then the other thing that is worthwhile considering are what are the second order effects of this? So if we are working from home, let's say into perpetuity, well then how do we recruit? Do we recruit digitally? Do we onboard digitally? What happens then later on in terms of rapport? How do we retain staff? How do we promote staff? When visibility is different, what do we do? And also we have to think about if the future is digital, if marketing in the future is all about this, if it's on Zoom, if it's on webinars, if it's all digital, then how do we make sure that we prepare ourselves and our businesses accordingly? So I think it's not just about here's how much things cost now in comparison to how things cost in the past, is that we're not talking short term here. We have to think medium to long term, and fundamentally that takes a holistic approach.
And I don't think we've ever had a period in humanity where so many people have thought about how their bedroom looks to the rest of the world from a seated position. So, that's one thing that comes to mind for me, Susan. One thing I'm seeing from a comment from Lawrence, because we have a great international range of attendees today. So we're going to just slow down a little bit in the way we talk, because obviously the three of us are native Irish people. We are great talkers, and Irish will talk a bit fast. So we're going to slow it down because obviously a few of you, English is your second language, and it's great to have you all on board because we want to have this international audience, and it's fantastic. So Lawrence Carvalho, thanks for that. And I'll be honest, Lawrence, the only reason I can pronounce your name is because of Ricardo, the footballer, but good for that. So I'm going to bring us on now to Niall, but before I do, a reminder, the Q&A, we're going to be taking your questions throughout, so please go into that section. You'll see at the bottom of your screen. Go in there and ask your questions. Niall, well, wow. We've got a small matter of time right now, I suppose, which is an issue for everybody. And I don't mean this event, I mean in life. So we're all trying to make sure we maximize our productivity in a way that, you know, makes sense, so we aren't breaking people. Like, so how do we make sure we can free up more time in order to actually think about what we're going to do with our business, when right now we don't know the answers to a lot of stuff, and we don't know when we're going to know those answers?
Yeah, absolutely. I was a bit scared by the topic of time. It's a wide-ranging topic and dips into physics, which I haven't done any in a while. But in terms of freeing up time, like, who doesn't want more time? Who doesn't want more time to think about what they need to do with their business? Who doesn't want more time to drive more productivity, etc., in their business? And I guess from our perspective, you know, that's really what's, you know, the company I work for is predicated on. It's empowering everyone and every organization to do more. So a lot of how we help our customers is rooted in freeing up time. I think, you know, in the last few months, as we've gone through, you know, this unprecedented event, there's a couple of things that have been sprung to my mind, a couple of things I've been keeping an eye on. So, you know, some research I've seen is very interesting statistic is that 2% of businesses believe they will operate in the same fashion post-COVID. So 98% of businesses are saying that they're going to change how they operate, which is interesting, scary, thought-provoking. You know, and really the way I think about it is probably across three areas. It's navigating what's happening now, in terms of the time that people are spending running their businesses, you know, performing action in their business, navigating the now, planning what's next, and then probably getting into that area, you know, generating the time during those two phases, and then getting in the area to shape the future of their business or their organization. So really right now we're in a remote everything phase. We're responding to things in real time. We're maybe not getting the time to think, how can we pivot and change, etc. You know, and it's more than just meetings that we need in businesses. It's more than just you know, online video calls, etc. It's collaboration, it's running business processes, etc. So we really need to think about how can we drive that productivity first off, in the first instance, to save time, and then we need to think about how can we adapt our business models and the things that we've always done. How can we change those to free up more time through techniques like automation or leaning or, you know, process improvement, etc. And then we really need to look at, you know, properly restarting maybe with new techniques, our customer services, or, you know, our citizen services, etc. And then finally, it's really about, you know, once we've gone through that thought process, then what are the new opportunities and scenarios that we can go after as businesses and organizations, and then focus long-term on growth and improvement, so we can really, you know, keep those cost and time savings that we've generated over these two periods.
Now, Niall, a lot of people watching there would have noticed I raised my phone to my face while you were talking, and that was because I'm keeping an eye on the poll. And one of the questions we have is, are you, you know, low code ready? And most people have said they're not sure. So I suppose for those who aren't sure, let's talk a bit about that, like, you know, before we get on to the rest of the Q&A, like, what should they be asking themselves in order to make sure they know if they're low code ready, given the majority of our respondents so far saying they don't know?
Yeah, sure. So I think if we think about how technology can support business, and I definitely don't see it as you know, an isolated island of tech for tech's sake, right? It exists in a continuum of people, process, technology, and strategy. That's the way I think about it. And I think, you know, traditionally we've had business processes or business challenges solved by off-the-shelf software. ERP, CRM, etc. We're all familiar with it in the business community.
Absolutely.
And then other things like custom app development. Right? We're all familiar with that. We build an app, we define our requirements, etc. But there's actually a missed opportunity in businesses. So things that aren't covered off by off the shelf, or things that aren't covered off by traditionally expensive, time-consuming app development, and that may be totally fine. And you might be solving quite a complex business problem with custom app development. There's innovation you're missing out in your business, and that's where LowCode is really pointed at. So this is a new innovation, newish innovation in the market, and it's really democratizing app development, democratizing workflow automation, democratizing AI, democratizing bots that we may have heard of. And it's putting new tools in the hands of innovators, whether they sit in the business or whether they sit in IT. So it's really, I see it as a third pillar to helping you innovate in your business through technology, alongside classic off-the-shelf and custom app development.
And we're going to move on to our Q&A section now, but of course, remember, you can get your questions in throughout. Just go to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, go in there. And pardon me, we've already got our first question in. It's from Lawrence. And so I'm going to go with Susan on this first. So Lawrence says, retraining and use of the creative process through STEAM, which of course is like adding that A to, to STEM, where art can get more stakeholder mixed development, the process of communication of low-code automation. So I suppose when it comes to bringing the A into STEAM, when it comes to that sort of stakeholder thing, why is that sort of still important now when we're dealing with a crisis, or is it even more important, Susan?
Well, I think creativity is always going to matter. And as I was listening there to Niall, I mean, we as a very small business have had to become quite familiar with these low code, different opportunities for businesses. And I have to say, Niall, you're completely right. It does democratize code. It really, really does. And it democratizes, the ability to put tech workflows in place and so on. But the creativity that you need in order to think through these things really, really matters. The other thing that really matters is how visually things are presented. So if we look at the explosion of apps like, whether it's Pinterest, of course, Instagram, or any of these, it just shows that people consume information and want to consume ways in which they do things or make opinions on things or what's happening in the world. They want to do so in a more and more visual way. We all know as well that UX matters. And UX, of course, is user experience. So if I'm designing an experience, and let's say it's not an app, let's say that it's a training program, let's say that it's the way in which that you would interact with the shop, let's say that it's how even this webinar is being produced. So if you look at how Zoom has put the virtual backgrounds in place and so on, is that if you don't have an artistic flair, if you don't think about creativity and don't look at both the left and the right brain, you can really miss out. And that, of course, comes back to competitiveness, is that really how one is competitive in the market. I'm either lower cost or else I'm differentiated. And if you can be differentiated by looking at things logically and the way in which you can solve a problem and do so beautifully, it's all the better. And
Niall, if you want to give your own thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like, did you see my notes, Emmet, by the way? I think for me, creativity is actually at the heart of this. So what we actually have is we have this unprecedented event, and I absolutely agree with Susan. We have this unprecedented event, and what we have the opportunity now to do is actually tap more into human creativity and human endeavor. And really, when we think about digital transformation and technologies like low-code platforms, these are going to be driven by human creativity, and I'd nearly say they'll be only driven by human creativity. Because you need to have the creativity piece to form your visions for what you want to do with your business and what you want to do with the technology for your business. I would also say, in terms of people and employees being remote and stuff like that, you want to make sure that they're engaged. And one way to engage people is through human creativity, right? Ask them to fix problems, ask them to solve things. So I think creativity is really, really at the heart of this. And actually, some research I did before is that we have a bit of a lacking in creativity in business in Ireland, especially in the software industry. So I think we can do more about that.
And one little bit of creativity for everybody tuning in. If you keep a swear jar at home, add the phrase new normal to your list of words for it, and believe me, you're going to raise so much money for charity doing it that way. Susan, I want to move on to you with a question for myself, to be honest. And we are doing things differently. Niall and yourself have both mentioned we need to be more creative in doing it, but obviously doing that comes at a cost. And again, when I say cost, I don't just mean financial. We all know everything costs money, but in terms of cost of how you do business as well, really, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And there's a couple of things we need to look at here, and certainly that I've been looking at within the structure of our own business as well, is that if you want to simply put numbers on the cost of what has changed, Chambers Ireland recently ran a survey, 1,300 businesses, and they asked people to put a number on the cost of basically reshaping their space, if it was retail or if it was hospitality, etc. And the typical cost came in at about €2,000, and also 25% of businesses were spending more than €5,000. Now that was before opening up. Of course, then you have the continuous PPE and you have the continuous sanitization and so on. So if you think about what are the actual costs involved in changing over and above, as I say, over and above the long-term transformational change, that's what they have. But what I also think we need to consider, and this goes back to an economic term that everybody learns in the textbook 101, is opportunity cost. So we also need to think about, like, what costs have fallen away as a result of this. And I don't know about, either Niall or yourself, Emmet, or even the audience who've been here today, but I find that in our business, that what we have realized back is all of the time that we spent running around, whether it was going from this hotel to that hotel for a meeting, getting on planes to have business development meetings or various different things that probably could have been done digitally, but we kind of didn't because it was the status quo. And I found an interesting statistic from a California company. What they did was that they used 1 million data points with 30,000 users of people who were working from home. Now, so when I say working from home, I'm talking about across the board. And that they found that actually productivity rose by 47%. And that was when you eliminated out all of the various different, as I say, the running around that we used to do. Also, other statistics would show that people who are working from home are working around about 1.4 days extra per month. The problem with that, of course, now is that how long would that last, and what is that driven by? And what I think is important to talk about, Emmet, and I won't hog the limelight in this yet, but I'll come back to it, is the difference between what's temporary and what's permanent as well. When we talk about the new normal, and I've just raised money for you there now, but when we talk about that, we also need to think about that what has become permanent and what is going to be temporary. By the way, I absolutely fall into that statistic that Niall said of 98% of businesses expect to do business differently. We started doing business differently from that middle week of March. And if we had tried to stay still, there's no way I'd be on this webinar today talking to you. The other thing that we need to be aware of is we are ultimately on a playing field that we have to be considerate of, which is the macroeconomic environment. Just a couple of very simple things, damning things, but simple all the same, is that on average, the EU is predicting 8.3% reduction in GDP this year. That is for the EU as a whole. Now, Ireland is expected to be about 8.5%. Yesterday, I hosted a session about doing business in Hungary, and Hungary is expected to be just between 3 to 6%. So we are also going to be operating in that environment. And what's going to be really important there, because before in the last crisis, if we were exporting out, then of course that figure mattered less. But of course now there isn't any country affected. And if we look at our greatest trading partner, particularly the US, of course, that is also going through a very significant issue. So I think if you think about those things, about what costs have gone up and how to deal with them, and there's a variety of grants and different activities you can take in that direction, what opportunity costs have you gained back, and also what macroeconomic environment you're working in, that can be a good way to frame moving forward.
Susan, I'm going to have to jump in there because questions are flying in thick and fast. Thanks, everybody. Keep them coming. I'm going to begin, though, with one from Ebenezer, which is for an organization that has ran all its processes until COVID-19 and the normal way, I suppose, and is forced to go virtual. What's sort of the model to maintain support business activities as opposed to reduce? He says reduce long term. I'm guessing he means stresses and costs and the like. So I suppose, Niall, if you want to address that.
Sorry, Emmet, just repeat the last end of the
question. So basically, a lot of companies have had to go virtual, obviously, during all this, and what sort of model can be used to maintain, I suppose, normality and support business activities to reduce long-term, expense in the matter, but also long-term sort of challenges for that business.
Yeah, I suppose I'm going to start with the short term. So I think the short term, like I've seen examples in in Ireland of things getting done in days, you leveraging things like LowCode that previous took years, and that's not a joke. I've seen one large project go live in 8 days. Previous project took 1 year. So I think there's ways now of addressing these problems. I think back to my earlier point about the creativity piece. I think to address it longer term, we need to use a bit more creativity here and actually come up with a vision and a strategy for how we want to change. And there's lots and lots of tools out there. The strategic management consulting tools, and all the quadrants and all that kind of stuff, where you can plot what's important to here and now. But I think what a lot of it is, some of the tooling now is so easy to use. Just get doing it, right? I spoke to a managing partner in a law firm recently, and right in the height of COVID, where they're briefing barristers, for example, it was all paper, right? Literally overnight, they went to zero paper, right? Literally overnight. And these were people who'd be self-confessed slight technophobes because they're concentrated on the legal practice.
A barrister, I can say that is pretty common.
But they literally, Emmet, they went to zero paper overnight. And that's saved them a huge amount of cost, just even in posting, right? So for them, this has sparked an idea with the partners in the firm. How can we do more with technology? How can we paint that vision for ourselves? How do we dress it in a strategic way, in a thoughtful way?
And I got two questions here which are pretty similar, so I'm going to go to them both at the same time. One from Mark Downey, which is, with IT, the traditional gatekeeper for new tech and business, how do you convince them to embrace the business contribution via low-code and the like? And Michelle McKenna's got a great one as well, similar lines. Given so many orgs have little awareness of automation and the benefits it can bring, including budget, how soon could they see a return on investment on implementing low-code automation? Susan, if you want to address this first.
Okay, so I think it's the same answer for this as you would for anything about how do we convince people to do anything, is speak their language. Is if you're talking to finance people, I know the first question mentioned tech, but if you're speaking to finance people, talk about the return on investment or potential. If you're talking to marketing people, talk to them in terms of how this is going to make a difference to the analytics that matter to them. If you're talking to HR people, talk about how this will boost engagement. Like as Simon Sinek says, Emmet, start with why. Why would this matter? And I think that's a very important part. Now, what matters to everybody at the moment is speed. If I again refer back to the major accelerated trends that have happened in the past couple of months. In fact, Niall's CEO was recently on their earnings call, and they said that today's quarter is the old year, and they're right. Is that now enough happens in one quarter that used to be in a year before. In about 2017, we actually built an app in our business on Bubble. And we had a 30-day free trial. And actually, that's a great way to make sure you get things done in a short period of time. And Bubble is basically exactly what Niall is describing. It's a low-code way to build an app and just to play with it and to see if we could build it and break it and see if it worked and put it out to a couple of people, see what they thought. And then that was that. We have been using a variety of different things. And I know Niall has specific technologies that he wants to refer to, so I'm going to leave him to mention those. But we have put in workflows that have mattered hugely. They take time out of the equation. So low code basically means you don't have to be a complete techie to understand it. But what I do think you have to be is you have to really figure out the problem that you need to solve. And that answers both Mark and Michelle's question is, what is the problem that you need to solve? Speak in their language and then demonstrate the benefit. It's really going back to how you sell and influence.
And before I ask now about the tools, I'm just going to jump back to our poll briefly, because we're asking, of course, what the obstacles are preventing you from implementing more automation. And it's a multiple choice one, but comfortably the majority, which is that limited resources to implement and manage. So Niall, I suppose, that's what people are saying. And I'm guessing when it comes to the tools that can improve engagement, you can think of a few that'll help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the key thing here is that to understand is low code is not just for citizen developers, is a term that some of you may or may not have heard of. So this is typically business users developing the apps themselves, like a Excel spreadsheet or something. But it's also for IT and for pro developers. So it exists on both ends of the spectrum. I think, in terms of where low code is going, Gartner estimates 65% of all app dev is going to be done by low code in 2024. So this is a reality in the market now. And in terms of the returns on investment, it's potentially massive for businesses. We're seeing double, quadruple, triple within 2 years. We're seeing 75% reduction in development costs and huge time saving. So like some of the tools, for example, would be simple apps. So you could give tech savvy or innovators in your business access to create simple apps, and then have IT and the developers work on more complex problems. About 2/3 of all business have a backlog of business applications. Some of them are really simple, and IT, just because of resource constraints, just can't get to them, right? So why not give it to the innovators in your business? And where we typically see these innovators are people who just, an innovator in your own organization. They're people who just want to make things better. They're people who want to improve stuff, fix things. It could be the new person in the door, the new young, earlier in career person. I know in the law firm I spoke about, it's actually a legal clerk who's driving the low code piece there, and they just picked it up themselves, and they just started doing it and making it, and they really understand. So this is another important point: is it's the people that are at the coalface of the business who really deeply understand the business or the task or the function. These are the people we're trying to pull in for under low code, because that's a vein of innovation that is untapped potentially. Back to my 3-pillar example, that's a vein of innovation you can tap into in your organization, and the technology can light that up for you.
And Niall, I just have to tell you, you're psychic, by the way, because you've managed to answer a question from one of our attendees without having seen it. So congratulations on that, asking about tools that you'd recommend. But another of our attendees, John Clear, has got a great comment here. In his mind, a strategy is about where to play and how to win, the innovations, our agile steps that take on the journey. COVID-19 has obviously fast-tracked that transformation and blurs between strategy and innovation. So a creative approach is important. So I suppose when it comes to sort of, getting those people on board faster, we have to think about stuff. And one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is sort of when you look at the processes we have, be that with your staff, be that with your various tools and apps, we're sort of, going to have to change a lot. And it reminds me of a bit in Mad Men, a show which I loved when it was out, where Don Draper, unfortunately, he's talking to cigarette executive, so that's the unfortunate part. But he was describing the best opportunity since the invention of cereal. Are we in a space now where we kind of have an open playing field? We can completely rethink what we see as how we work and how we do business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think of less as the term low code platform, but it's an innovation, I think, now, and it's being accelerated by the context of this unique event in the pandemic. So we're putting the ability to innovate in more and more hands, right? So that's really interesting, I think, for businesses. But I think it's important to root it first in the business value, so it doesn't become just tech for tech's sake, a shiny new toy, etc. And look, we'd always say that for many years over business applications. But then, as I mentioned earlier, right, this is about going to the, part of it's about going to the coal faces in your business and finding those innovators who want to fix things. You're now probably going to be able to give them tools that they never had before, right? Previously, before, it was because IT is resource constraint and needs to work on strategic and important things and can't get through the entire needs of the business side. Now you can, right? And we see massive amounts of example across the world with technology in this. Autoglass, who we all know, is an example of that. There was a guy who was a dispatcher. He literally taught himself how to do it on YouTube, and he ended up saving the company hundreds of thousands of pounds. And just because he's an innovator, he just wanted to make things better, right? I think the other really important point is make it inclusive, right? And I really like this thought around these innovations should be inclusive, and it's no longer should we just be solely thinking about tops-down monolithic digital transformation programs. We should be enabling the innovation to empower people in the organization. A great example of that is, I was chatting to a guy recently, works for London Bus. He actually used to be a ticket collector on the buses. Again, he taught himself, he was an innovator. He wanted to break things, fix things, make things better. And as part of their initiative, they actually, there's a chap who cleans the underside of the London Bus. and it's a big hose, and he hoses it down, right? As part of the digital initiative, they gave him a phone, they gave him an app, right? So he was included. He'd never had a device or an app created for him in his life. And it's about empowering people and making it inclusive. And I think, you know, there's a famous phrase, perfect is the enemy of good. You know, these are apps that can be created and rolled out very, very quickly, and then you can iterate on them and you can make them better over time, rather than spending a huge amounts of time planning, right? No one spends a huge amount of time planning when they're, you know, doing a formula in Excel. It's the same kind of thought process for this. And then just a couple of other points on it is, you know, from an IT perspective, we can't forget about IT and the need to governance and for it to be secure in your organization. So if you're going to have all this innovation happening with new data, you want to make sure that that's secure. So absolutely IT are involved. This isn't citizen developer or you know, putting innovation in more hands isn't about excluding IT or marginalizing them. In fact, they become more central to enabling the business. And then, you know, this is all also about communities and networks, right? Create communities and networks within your organizations and outside your organizations, you know, talking about the macro point, you know, so people can learn from each other. And creativity, a lot of the times, is about building on each other's ideas and you know, as a sector or as a group of companies. So I think they're the kind of things that, you know, I think about when I think about the opportunity and probably the things to think about with LowCode, because it's slightly different.
And with all this in mind, I think we need to talk about not so much the elephant in the room, but that the elephant is the room. We have to think about space, Susan, and, you know, we're going to have to change our relationship with it. So what's that going to involve? Because there's a lot to get through here when it comes to how we think about space.
Well, I think a good place to start is one statement that Niall made through that last point, which is that an innovator is simply who wants to do things better. Is that when we talk about innovation, we're not talking about trying to find Einstein or to find somebody who's going to come up with a whole new invention. Is simply how do we do things better. When it comes to our relationship with space, obviously we have all been working from home or working from somewhere that we weren't traditionally working from, except for possibly essential workers and so on. But I think we tend to be kind of swinging the pendulum a bit too much in this discussion, where there's the assumption that, okay, well then that's okay, that's worked, so we'll keep it that way. Well, I do wonder though, Emmet, like I've met you in person before. I haven't met Niall or I haven't met Jennifer in person before, but I hope to at some point. But the point I'm making is that a lot of the time that we work with people, we have actually met them in person before. You know, we've built up that social capital. And therefore, what about as time moves on? Let's say if we move into 6-12 months, a lot of people are going to be moving on in their jobs, and are moving in their positions. And if you talk to anybody who started a job where they started working from home, they couldn't understand politically who was who in the organization, couldn't pick up the social cues, you know, that typical water cooler conversation. They didn't have that. So therefore, I don't think that the way things are being done now is what we should just expect as the playbook for the future. So I think we first of all need to think about a hybrid model. Going back to Niall's statistic of 98% of businesses doing things differently, I think an awful lot of them will consider, okay, we want to have people in the office, but we also want people to work from home. How do we make it right? The second thing is, what does the workplace represent to us? Is it all about the interactions that we have with people? And then on the other hand, some of us walk into a building, say hello to maybe the receptionist in the morning, come in and sit in a room on our own. So what are we doing that for? Couldn't we just do that in the sitting room? The thing is, a lot of us in a working environment actually like having a second space or a third space, whichever you want to call it, is that it's not a space from home. But does that have to be where it involves either a high rent in order to go into, you know, prime real estate in Dublin, or could it be somewhere like a co-working space anywhere in rural Ireland, assuming, of course, Wi-Fi is brilliant. So I think we also need to consider, what is it that we're actually looking for in terms of space? Is it a specific space where everybody is together? And that, of course, presents its own challenges now with COVID-19. Or is it that we simply want somewhere else? And I think a lot of companies would be very wise to consider taking some co-working space, or maybe having satellite places where people can simply have that division. Another issue that, speaking of elephants, is that we also need to be considerate that cybersecurity is a massive issue when it comes from taking that previously docked, highly secure desktop. And now we're saying, oh, you know, I feel like going to Starbucks today and working from there, and I'll just use their Wi-Fi in order to log on to the company portal. well, that can present a lot of challenges too. So I think cyber secure hygiene is very important. And that, of course, a lot of people hadn't time to think about that when they were in their offices today, and tomorrow they were working from home, and that was the way it was. So I think that needs to be considered. And the last thing I'll say about space is recruitment and onboarding. Last year we had 3 virtual interns from the University of California, San Diego. And I made the mistake, Emmet, of recruiting them in person and onboarding them digitally. I should have done it the other way around. I should have recruited them digitally and spent the time in building the rapport at the beginning, because that was the bit we struggled with. So I think we need to think about what needs to work kind of into permanency that levers what has worked on a temporary basis. And also we need to think about what space is used for and why it's there, economically and otherwise. And then also the timing of it. When is it used and at what stages of employee development?
Now, I am conscious of our time here, so I'm going to take another question here from the floor, which is as an IT manager with an understaffed IT department, how do we get engagement with stakeholders or end users to get them to use the tools available when they will often say they are too busy to get involved in continuous improvement projects? Niall, I think this actually relates a lot to other things I actually wanted to ask you, which is, how do we look at the business benefit beyond it being at sort of at a task function level? Because obviously, as Susan mentioned earlier, we're all working a bit more, about 1.4 days per month on average more, but we all feel it at the same time. So I suppose your thoughts on this.
Yeah, look, I think we start by rooting it in value. So I've often come across this. So I empathize with the IT manager who asked the question. I've come across this many times, and I think it's the conundrum of I need more help from technology, but I don't have enough time to be involved in it, right? So I think what we do is we start to root it in value, and we make an argument or construct a discussion around, well, if we did this, if you spend X helping me with this, you'll reap the rewards of 2 or 3x multiple times of X, right? So I think it's this idea of rooting it in value, but also I think making it personal for them. And going back to my earlier point around champions, so making it personal for them means, from an IT perspective, probably getting more fluency with regards how do humans actually change. So what's human behavior, and how do you actually help humans change their behavior, right? So you need to persuade them in some way, right, to go from state A to state B in terms of their behavior. So I definitely see a need for higher fluency in IT around how do you help the business user adopt, and that's rooted in the change piece with them, right? But then also include them, right? And I think to Susan's earlier point, speak their language, understand more about what the problems that they're trying to solve, and then sometimes these things start extremely small and extremely elegantly. Like I can think of examples like the early in career person. You can't get through to the old chiseled veteran, right? So you work with, say, the early in career person who just might have a higher affinity for technology, and then they can help bring their colleagues along on the journey because they've built the app. So they're paving the way almost. So I'd say adoption champions or innovators in the business can help, and then just building that fluency around being able to see the problem from their point of view.
And we have one more from the floor here. And by the way, this is your last chance to get questions in from the floor, folks. So get them in now if you're going to get them in. But it's a great one actually from Michelle, which is about how the likes of Zoom and House Party have done very well from COVID. And are there any sort of low-code apps that either of you see that are going to become household names in a similar vein? Susan, I'll start with yourself. Anything come to mind you reckon that's going to be?
Maybe I'm predating COVID, but like we have completely eliminated email out of our business between us. There's no reason for me to be emailing a staff member to the exclusion of the others. So our entire chat system is based on Slack. We're just there. That is where we run everything, all of our communications between the business. And then secondly, Trello, we have a project management app as well that I find, which is really useful for just managing so many things in a low touch way, as distinct from a low code way. But another thing that we use, now I don't think that as many people will be familiar with this one, is Zapier. And what Zapier does is that it puts workflows in place. So where, let's say, for example, if I need to move I need to register a lot of people for a webinar, for example. I can set up a Zap where I have a list of people who want to register for X. I simply put the list on Google Sheets and then it automatically transfers them across. And then from there, it can have many other impacts as well. So they're all three examples of where I didn't need a whole lot of code at all. But then on the other hand, it enabled us to do things really well. Just while I'm on the subject, I also use for our teenagers, so we run a lot of programs for young people. I find Padlet is another app that's great for kind of a scattergun approach of ideas, and also Coggle is great for mind mapping. So I don't think, maybe I'm not answering Michelle's question about household names, but certainly if you call very prolific across businesses, I have to say some of them you've probably already heard of, but other ones we've had recently and to great effect.
And Niall, any you think are going to become household names that might not be yet?
Well, full disclosure, I work for Microsoft, right? So if I worked for Coke, I wouldn't be talking about Pepsi. Yeah, look, I think on our side, things like Teams, which is, like Zoom has grown hugely over COVID. So that's not just for meetings and video, it's also for collaboration. And it's also, what I think is going to be really interesting is it's technologies like Teams will start helping run our business processes. That's what I think is it's going to be an interesting development, because all of the low code pieces that we'll see, and this isn't just in the Microsoft environment, there's over 300 connectors out of the box, and you can build your own to other things, like Listify or indeed to Salesforce, to SAP, whatever it is, right? You'll have this low code ability now to build apps and to build business intelligence dashboards and to use AI from within functionality like Teams, and you'll be able to connect via API into many different data sources. So what I think is going to become a household name actually is really data. So what the low code and some of the remote technologies, like Teams, Zoom, etc. I think over time, what you'll see is they'll start bringing in data that then your AI or your business intelligence can run over to hopefully predict things in your business and then help you make better business decisions.
If I could just jump in there, Emmet, for a moment, I think the opportunity for Microsoft here on this is a lot of us think Teams is Zoom, and ultimately it's not, Niall. It does so much more. When it has Teams basically incorporates that chat function, and it has the calendar, and it has the APIs. I think the opportunity for Microsoft is just how, now that Teams is in front of us so much, is how can you get us into replacing other apps with it. And I think, well, I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that, but I think that there's Microsoft has become so much more relevant again in the way that it used to become, let's say, when Excel was what we thought a spreadsheet was. The same way before that, let's say email, we always thought of Microsoft email. I think Teams really has that transformative effect at the moment.
And we've got one last question here from the floor, which I'm going to wrap up on. And it is from Siobhan Smith from Explayo, which some of you may not be aware is one of the companies that worked on the COVID tracker app, which of course is one of the most popular apps in the history of apps. And her question is about the low-code, no-code service that her business has delivered. It's been great for return of investment for customers. She expects it to grow exponentially over the next 2 years. Value, great, all positive. The one concern, though, she hears time and again is about how secure it is. So do the two of you think there'll be any issues around security with low code, no code in the future? Susan, if you want to take that first.
I'll just say it's part of a wider conversation about cybersecurity in general. I think that cybersecurity matters to us when something goes wrong. And the point is that it needs to be, prevention is so much better than the cure. There's about 10 actions that can prevent 99% of problems. And as a business owner, I've had to take those seriously over time. And sorry now to anybody who's in the cyber world, but it can be a very dry topic and a very, I've plenty more things to be doing than preventing problems that are unlikely to happen. So I think that is a subset of a conversation that is a wider topic that we really do need to take care of. And it also feeds right into data as well. We need to protect our data. It's one of our greatest assets in the business.
And Niall, if you want to answer that briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the comment on Teams, Susan. But I absolutely agree with you on the data piece. And I think it's important for us probably not to generalize here around low code and the application of security to it, because it depends on which software vendor is creating it and under what security context the low code platform is placed in if I'm not being too esoteric. So like, for example, in LowCode and Microsoft, it's fully enterprise grade security. Microsoft is actually, and we don't talk about it enough, is one of the biggest security companies in the world. You know, our website is one of the most attempted hacked websites in the world. Billions of hits every day, etc. So our LowCode, for example, and we wouldn't be alone in this, it's fully enterprise grade security. And then, as you know, with security, any process and security processes are only as good as their weakest links, and weakest links can often be human in a security context. So I think, again, I talked about adoption. You know, you could extrapolate that into deployment. So the deployment is super important as you think about security. But absolutely, I think it's a given. These things have to be secure, especially in this day and age with the amount of data that's growing day by day.
I'd like to thank Niall and Susan for joining me for this chat. Before I hand over to Jen, though, we have one lovely surprise for all of you who've come along, because for enduring the three of us for the last 45 minutes, you get something out of it, which is you get a free consultation for your low-code readiness with OpenSky. So if you get in touch with OpenSky, you can get a free consultation from them to check your low-code readiness. Also, for any questions we didn't get to, you can email OpenSky. Emma Hayes is dealing with those. She's been working behind the scenes throughout, doing a great job on this, by the way. She's been the person making sure I know what the poll scores are, so she's been absolutely fantastic. So any questions we didn't get to today, because you were really great at the feedback, please get on to us via at OpenSky. We'll definitely have answers for you. But now I want to thank you all again on my behalf and hand you over to Jennifer Ward, who is a marketing manager at OpenSky.
Emmet, thanks so much. And really, I just want to say a very, very quick thank you to everyone who's come today to give us their valuable time to join the webinar. For all of the participants, we're going to send you all an email shortly with some collateral about the very thing that we were talking about, our low-code automation tools. That includes a demonstration on robotic process automation. There's an ebook in there and details on how to book your free low-code assessment. And finally, a massive thank you to our energetic and very fast-thinking speakers, Emmet, Susan and Niall. You've all been such a pleasure to work with. And in the absence of a live event where a crowd of people would applause, I extend my virtual applause to you. And thank you so much, and see you all soon.